You're a loser. Dad's new wife isn't. That's what my son said. Out loud. At Christmas dinner. In front of everyone. The room got quiet so fast, you could hear the knife scrape someone's plate. I was still holding my fork halfway to my mouth. My green beans sat there untouched. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just looked at him. He didn't even flinch. Russell sat there with his nice button-up shirt, his glass of wine, and his new wife laughing beside him. Not a nervous laugh either. She laughed like she agreed, like I was the punchline, and this dinner was just another reminder of how far out of the picture I'd been pushed. But I didn't react. I was listening, and what I heard that night changed everything. Let me tell you something before we go any further. I'm Monica Rivera. I'm 69 years old, and I've been quiet for a long time. Too long. I live in a small town outside Madison, Wisconsin. It's the kind of place where the winters are long and the silences are even longer, especially when the phone doesn't ring and no one knocks on your door. I wasn't supposed to be at that table, if we're being honest. Not after everything. Not after being cut off for nearly 3 years. No visits. No calls. Birthdays passed like regular Tuesdays. I watched my grandkids grow up through social media, pictures their stepmom posted from tropical vacations I'd never hear about. So when Russell called me in early December and said, "We'd love to have you join us for Christmas this year," I nearly dropped the dish I was drying. His voice was casual, like we talked last week. Jade thought it'd be nice. He added, "Jade, that's his dad's new wife. The one who swept in after the divorce like a shiny new car in the driveway. Always perfect, always polished, always knew what wine to bring and what story to tell at the right time." I wasn't invited to their wedding, didn't even know the date until I saw the photos online. So yes, it was strange to be invited now. But I said yes. I had my reasons, and none of them had to do with Russell. I showed up that afternoon with homemade cranberry bread and a basket of little gifts I'd wrapped by hand. Things I thought were thoughtful, a pair of wool socks for each grandkid, a small photo frame with a picture of their dad as a toddler, and some vanilla-scented lotion for Jade. Simple but personal. They greeted me at the door like I was someone's distant cousin. Polite, distant. No one hugged me except the youngest, who I'm pretty sure was told to. Dinner was set up beautifully. Long table, candles, cloth napkins. Jade always knew how to put on a show. She handed out drinks while Russell carved the roast like he was hosting a cooking show. I sat near the middle, next to my oldest granddaughter, who didn't say much beyond, "Hi." The conversation floated around me. I wasn't asked about my year, my life, or anything at all. Until that moment, Russell was talking about how well his dad and Jade were doing, their trip to Napa, the golf tournament Vincent almost won. Then he looked at me and said it. "You're a loser. Dad's new wife isn't." Just like that. No hesitation. No joke behind it. Just words dropped like a stone in still water. And the others? They stayed quiet. A few glanced at each other. Jade smirked into her wine glass. No one corrected him. No one stood up for me. I sat there with my fork in the air, then slowly lowered it to my plate. I didn't speak, because sometimes silence is louder than shouting. You see, they thought I came to be part of their holiday. They were wrong. I came because I knew something they didn't. I came because I had learned to listen in rooms where I used to beg to be heard. I came because I had built something in the quiet, something they couldn't take from me. They didn't know who I'd become, but they were about to. I didn't say anything, but that silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. 10 years ago, I signed my name on the divorce papers and handed over 40 years of marriage in exchange for silence. It wasn't a dramatic ending. No screaming. No cheating. Just years of being ignored until the emptiness became too loud to live with. Vincent and I had grown into strangers who shared a mailbox. By the time I brought up counseling, he'd already checked out. He didn't fight me on anything. That should have told me everything. But what hurt most wasn't the divorce itself. It was what came after. Russell was 26 at the time, old enough to understand things aren't always black and white. But he didn't want to understand. He wanted someone to blame. And I was the easier target. He moved out of state the same year. Said it was for work, but I knew better. The visits stopped. The calls got short. His texts came with periods instead of heart emojis. It was like I'd lost both of them at once, my husband and my son. And just like that, Vincent moved on. 6 months later, he was dating someone new, Jade, a woman with shiny hair, big sunglasses, and 1,000 friends online. I remember seeing her photo for the first time. They'd gone to a wine tasting, both dressed like they were 20 years younger than they were. He looked happy, or at least like he was trying very hard to be. When Russell met her, he took to her like she was some kind of gift. She was bubbly, loud, always organizing something. Summer cookouts, brunches, holiday trips. She made everything feel curated, like a catalog. And Russell loved that. She called him Russie, baked gluten-free cookies, posted selfies with him like she was his best friend. Meanwhile, I got silence. Or worse, polite distance. I didn't go to their Thanksgiving that first year. I wasn't invited. I made myself a small dinner at home and watched an old movie alone in my robe. I told myself it was fine. But when I saw the pictures online, them all in matching sweaters, even the grandkids, something inside me cracked. The next spring, Vincent and Jade bought a house together, not far from where we used to live. They held a housewarming party with catered food and a jazz trio. My old neighbor, Trudy, went. She called afterward to say, "Jade really knows how to host." I just nodded and said, "She seems like it." But inside, I felt like someone had erased me, like I'd been replaced in every room I used to stand in. When they got married a year later, I found out through Facebook a photo of Jade in white lace with a caption that said, "Forever starts now." Russell stood beside his father, grinning like it was the best day of his life. I sat on my porch that evening with a glass of iced tea and didn't say a word. My phone didn't buzz. No one checked in. My mailbox was empty. Over the years, people stopped asking how I was doing. Friends I'd known for decades slowly stopped inviting me to dinners. Some still talked to Vincent because he kept things light. Others didn't want to choose sides. But silence is a side, and most of them chose his. I lost more than a husband in that split. I lost a community. Russell stopped calling me Mom in texts. Just M. Sometimes nothing at all. He'd text a few days after my birthday. No call. Just a message that said, "Hope you had a nice day." I'd respond, "Thank you. I miss you." He never replied to that part. Meanwhile, Jade threw themed birthday parties for his kids, complete with balloon arches and catered cupcakes. She always posted group photos of the whole family, never including me. One time, she posted a photo with Russell's daughter and captioned it, "My mini-me." That one stung more than I care to admit. I sent gifts anyway. Handmade things. A crocheted blanket, a wooden puzzle box, a personalized calendar with family photos. I never saw those gifts again. No thank yous. No photos of the kids using them. Just nothing. It was like I was shouting into a canyon, and all I got back was my own echo. And still, I tried. Because when you're a mother, you hold on longer than you should. One Christmas, I mailed a package early. Spent a whole afternoon wrapping each item. Labeled everything. Added handwritten notes. I paid extra for shipping, so it'd arrive before the 24th. It was delivered. I never got a word about it. That was the year I stopped sending anything. That was the year I started seeing the truth. They didn't see what I carried, just what I no longer had. To them, I was the woman who'd lost her husband, her house, and her place in the family. Jade became the bright new chapter. I was the footnote. And for a while, I accepted it. I let myself believe that maybe I didn't belong anymore. But that was before I realized something. Just because someone doesn't invite you in doesn't mean you can't build your own door. And one day I did, but they wouldn't find that out until it was too late. After the divorce, the invitations stopped all at once. Not with a fight or an official cutoff, just with quiet. That first year, I chalked it up to the awkwardness of everything being new. New house, new wife, new family rhythm. I figured maybe they needed time to settle. I didn't want to press. So I waited. But the second year came. Then the third. Still no Thanksgiving invite. No call on Mother's Day. No, can you come to Lily's recital? Nothing. What I did get was pictures. Lots of them. Jade was always good at posting. Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest boards with holiday themes. Her phone seemed to be an extension of her hand. Every event had a photo shoot vibe. She made family gatherings look like a magazine spread. One post really stuck with me. It was Christmas Eve, 2 years after the divorce. There they were, Russell, his dad, Jade, and the grandkids lined up in front of a tree that probably came from a catalog, all in matching red and white pajamas. Even the dog had a little sweater. The caption said, "Grateful for the ones who matter most." I stared at that photo longer than I care to admit. I wasn't angry. I just felt erased. That same year, I had sent each of the grandkids a handmade scarf. I'd spent weeks picking the yarn, soft and warm, in each of their favorite colors. Wrapped them neatly. Added little tags with their names. Paid extra at the post office to make sure it got there on time. They arrived. I tracked it. I waited, hoping to see a picture. Maybe one of them wearing it, maybe a quick, "Thanks, Grandma," in a text. Something. Anything. Nothing came. I finally asked Russell about it months later. He just said, "Oh, they probably put them somewhere." You know how kids are. That was the last time I sent anything handmade. Slowly, it was like I stopped existing in their version of the story. Jade hosted a summer barbecue one year. Everyone in the photos wore little name tags with glitter pens. They were doing water balloons in the backyard, had a cotton candy machine. Someone had made a wooden sign that said the Jenkins Rivera Family Bash. My last name was there, but I wasn't. It didn't even sting anymore. Just felt strange, like seeing your own face in a photo you don't remember posing for. If you've ever scrolled through someone else's family photos and realized you were the only one missing, hit the like button. And if that didn't hurt even a little, then tell me in the comments, what does it take for someone to finally stop knocking on a closed door? People from our old neighborhood started asking fewer questions. At first, they'd say things like, "Have you seen the grandkids lately?" Or, "Jade seems fun." Huh? Eventually, they just stopped bringing them up. I started seeing a pattern. Weddings, graduations, birthdays. The same events I used to help plan now happened without me, even funerals. When my old church friend Edna passed, I saw Russell attended the service with Jade. I found out from a mutual friend. I stayed quiet through all of it. I didn't want to make things worse. But inside, I felt myself shrinking. And the thing is, when someone stops seeing you, it doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. First they stop calling. Then they stop including. Then they forget to tell others you exist. And after a while, even you start to question if you were ever really in the picture. There were days when I'd sit in the kitchen with my coffee and scroll through Jade's posts. The captions were always cheerful. The comments filled with hearts and family goals, and "You're such a light." I wasn't jealous, just confused. How had I gone from being the woman who packed Russell's lunch every day for 12 years to being a ghost in his family scrapbook? Sometimes I'd wonder if I did something wrong. Maybe I wasn't warm enough. Maybe I said too much. Maybe I didn't adjust quickly enough after the divorce. But then I'd remember, no one ever asked me how I was doing. No one ever gave me space to figure out who I was outside of wife and mother. Jade filled in the space I used to hold, and no one blinked. I wasn't needed, at least not in their story. And I'll be honest, for a long time, I told myself that was okay. I told myself that maybe my role was finished, that I should be proud Russell had a new support system, that maybe I was holding on to something that wasn't mine anymore. But the truth, I didn't step away. I was pushed. I used to think silence meant peace. But sometimes it's just a locked door you never agreed to. So I stopped knocking. And in that quiet, something strange happened. I stopped waiting for invitations that never came. And I started wondering what my life might look like if I built something of my own. Not for Russell. Not for approval. Not to earn my place back. Just for me. At first, I didn't know what that meant. I hadn't done something just for me in decades. But I knew I needed something. And what started as an idea in an empty room would turn into something bigger than they ever saw coming. I turned 65 alone. It wasn't a surprise. No calls. No texts. Not even a card in the mail. I made myself a small breakfast, toast, scrambled eggs, coffee with a little cinnamon like I always liked it. I sat at the kitchen table, phone face up beside me, hoping it would light up. It didn't. By noon, I stopped checking. I spent the rest of the day doing nothing in particular. Read a few pages of a book I couldn't focus on. Took a walk even though the wind made my eyes water. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, just one, and stood in the hallway mirror. I don't know what I expected to see, but the woman looking back at me wasn't who I remembered. She had the same brown eyes, the same hair that had gone soft gray over the years. But her face looked tired, not just from age, from disappointment, from feeling invisible for too long. And right there, I felt something shift. I whispered out loud, "This can't be it." I didn't say it with anger. I said it like someone who was finally ready to admit they wanted more. The next morning, I walked into the garage and found the pottery wheel I hadn't touched in over 20 years. It was covered in dust, tucked in the back behind some old garden tools and a stack of paint cans. I dragged it out, wiped it down, and just looked at it for a while. Back when Russell was little, I used to make small bowls and vases. Nothing fancy. It was just something I did for myself. I liked how it felt, shaping something with my hands, watching it come to life bit by bit. I hadn't touched it since before the divorce. That afternoon, I drove to the craft store and bought a few blocks of clay. My hands were slower than they used to be, but they remembered the way to press the edges smooth. How much water was too much? It all came back in bits and pieces. The first bowl was crooked. The second one collapsed. But I kept going. Every day after breakfast, I'd spend an hour at the wheel. Just me, the clay, and an old radio playing in the corner. At first, it was just for the peace. But after a couple of weeks, I had a small shelf filled with mugs, shallow bowls, candle holders. Simple things. Nothing perfect, but honest. One day at the grocery store, I saw a flyer for a local community workshop, creative spaces for women 60 plus. I stood in front of that board for a good 5 minutes before tearing off the tab with the number. That weekend, I went. There were about a dozen of us, all different stories. Some had lost husbands. Some were caring for grandkids full-time. A few had just retired and didn't know what to do with the hours. We sat in folding chairs, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs, and talked about what we used to love doing before life got too busy. I mentioned my wheel. Two women, Denise and Arla, asked if I could bring something next time. So I brought a few pieces. They held them like they were looking at something special. Denise turned a mug in her hand and said, "You could sell these." I laughed at first, but Arla leaned in and said, "No, really, you should look into Etsy or even Facebook Marketplace." I went home that day and started Googling. It felt overwhelming at first. All the steps, listing photos, pricing, shipping. But I wrote it all down. I kept a little notebook just for ideas and steps to follow. A week later, I took pictures of 6 items, 4 mugs and 2 bowls, and posted them on Etsy under the name Rivera Clay and Light. I didn't expect anything, but 2 days later, I sold my first piece. A woman in Colorado bought a speckled blue mug I'd made on a rainy Tuesday. She left a message with her order. Reminds me of my mother's old kitchen set. Thank you. I reread that message 5 times. That same week, I sold another mug, then a bowl. It wasn't about the money. It was the idea that something I made with my own hands was now part of someone else's life. I told Denise and Arla at the next workshop, and they cheered like I'd won the lottery. Denise offered to help me set up a basic spreadsheet. Arla showed me how to make simple business cards at the library printer. I didn't want pity. I wanted purpose. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had something of my own. Something no one could take from me. I didn't tell Russell. I didn't tell anyone in the family. Not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted to see what I could build without needing anyone's approval. Turns out, I didn't need an invitation to be seen. I just needed to step into the light myself. Once I made my first sale, I figured that might be it. Beginner's luck. But the next week, another mug sold, then a bowl, then 2 more mugs. My little Etsy shop, Rivera Clay and Light, had barely 5 items listed, but it was real. It had a name, a page, and now, sales. I started spending a couple hours a day working on the basics, watching YouTube videos about product photography, reading blog posts about SEO and what people were really searching for. I didn't know what keywords were before all this, but I learned. At night, I'd sit in my recliner with my laptop and study listings from other shops. Not to copy, but to understand what made people click, what words made someone stop scrolling. My photos needed work, that was clear. So I borrowed my neighbor's old DSLR camera and set up a tiny photo space in the laundry room, white poster board taped to the wall, a desk lamp with a daylight bulb. Every piece I made, I photographed from 3 angles. I added little details in the description, like perfect for your morning oatmeal or soft edges, made with care. I didn't want it to feel like a factory. I wanted it to feel like something made in a quiet room by someone who understood slow mornings. I started including handwritten notes in each box. Just a few lines. Nothing fancy. Thank you for giving my piece a home. Warmly, Monica. I wrote each one while the boxes waited to be sealed. Something about that felt right, like I was sending a small part of myself out into the world. Then one day, I got an order from someone named Harriet in Oregon. She bought a set of 2 cereal bowls with a speckled glaze I'd mixed on a whim. I packed them carefully, bubble wrap, craft paper, hand-tied twine. A week later, I got a message from her. It said, "I'm a retired chef. Your bowls reminded me of the ones my grandmother used when she made hot cereal every Sunday. I posted about them on my Instagram. Hope you don't mind." She included a link. I clicked. There it was, a photo of oatmeal with fresh fruit sitting in my bowl, captioned with a little story about how food tastes better when the dish has soul. Her post got shared. People commented. That week, I sold 9 more items. Orders started trickling in steadily after that. One to Georgia, another to Michigan. Someone in Vermont bought 4 mugs for their writing group. I rearranged the garage, turned it into a proper workspace. My neighbor's son helped hang shelves. I labeled bins by color and shape. I bought a better clay cutter and splurged on packaging tape that didn't peel at the corners. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was becoming a rhythm. By the end of the first year, I was shipping 20 pieces a week, sometimes more. By 18 months, that number had doubled. My small garage felt like a factory some mornings. Boxes lined the floor. I'd listen to podcasts while wrapping orders, sipping tea, and checking addresses twice to make sure nothing went wrong. I started waking up with energy again. And the messages, those were the part one didn't expect. A woman from Maine wrote, "My sister passed last fall. I light a candle in the holder you made every night. It gives me comfort." Another said, "I bought 1 mug, and now I drink out of nothing else. It just feels better somehow." I kept every message, printed some out, and taped them inside a notebook. Not to brag, just to remember. They didn't know my story. If someone's ever seen your heart without asking for your history, share this with them. And if you're watching silently without subscribing, tell me in the comments, what's stopping you from being part of something honest? They didn't know about Russell, about Christmases missed, about sitting alone on my birthday with toast and cinnamon coffee. They didn't know about the scarves never worn, or the invitations never sent. They didn't know what I'd lost. They just felt the warmth in the glaze. And to me, that meant something. Sometimes I'd pause before sealing a box and think, this is going to someone who actually wants it. That idea healed me in a way nothing else could. I wasn't trying to make a point anymore. I wasn't trying to get anyone's attention. I was just doing what felt real. Some days were slow. Some weeks I'd get a return or a message about a chipped handle and feel that old voice creep in. Maybe you're not good enough. But then I'd look at the wall of notes, the calendar full of shipping dates, the shelf of finished pieces waiting for new homes. And I'd keep going. One morning, as I was labeling boxes, I caught my reflection in the garage window. And this time, I recognized her. Messy hair, smudged apron, soft eyes with purpose behind them. I smiled. I had made something out of clay. And somehow, I'd shaped myself back in the process. It was early December when the phone rang. I saw Russell's name flash on the screen, and for a second, I thought it was a mistake. He hadn't called in over a year. I let it ring once, twice, then picked it up. "Hi, Mom," he said, like no time had passed. "I was calling to see if you'd like to come to our Christmas dinner this year." Just like that. No explanation. "No, sorry it's been a while." No small talk. Jade thought it might be good. He added, I sat at my kitchen table, staring out the window at the bare trees. It had snowed the night before. Everything looked quiet and still, like it hadn't decided what kind of day it wanted to be. "I'll think about it." I said. "Okay, yeah, let us know," he replied. "It'll just be us, the kids, and Dad and Jade." Of course. After we hung up, I sat there for a long while. Why now? Why me? I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel angry. Just cautious. I wasn't naive anymore. I knew the pattern. Be included when it was convenient. Be forgotten when it wasn't. But something about the way he asked, it didn't sound like an olive branch. It sounded like a task being checked off. Still, I said yes. Not because I missed them. Not because I hoped things would magically change. I said yes because I wanted to look those people in the eye and know that I didn't need anything from them. No validation. No praise. No seat at their table. Just closure. Over the next few days, I picked up a few simple gifts. A sampler of herbal teas for Jade, the kind she'd once posted about drinking before bed. A hand-carved wooden box for my granddaughter, with a small note tucked inside. And two of my favorite mugs, ones I'd made myself, for Russell and his wife. I didn't wrap them in fancy paper, just brown craft with twine. Simple. Honest. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't going to prove anything. Just going to show up whole. The night before I left, I walked out to the garage one last time. My shelves were full, orders packed, and ready. I set the shop closed notice on my Etsy page with a return date after the holidays. The drive the next day was long but quiet. I played music, thought about the years that had passed. I thought about the woman I used to be, how I used to hope for a text, reread messages looking for meaning that wasn't there. I remembered how I used to second-guess everything I said when I was around them. That woman wouldn't be joining them this year. I arrived a little after 4. Their house looked the same as it always did from the outside. Clean lawn, wreath on the door, big white SUV in the driveway. Russell opened the door. "Hey, glad you made it." I stepped inside. The house smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken. The tree in the corner sparkled with silver ornaments. No homemade ones. Just the kind that come in matching sets from department stores. Jade came around the corner. "Hi, Monica," she said. Her smile looked tight, like it didn't quite fit. "Thanks for having me," I said. The kids barely looked up, too busy with their tablets. I handed over the gifts and took off my coat. No one asked how the drive was. No one asked how I'd been. That was fine. I wasn't there for the conversation. Dinner was set up nicely. Candles, folded napkins, wine glasses already filled. They knew how to create an image, but as I sat at the table, something felt flat. Like the decorations were trying too hard. Like the joy was painted on. Russell talked about work. Jade talked about a new fitness program. Vincent chimed in here and there with updates from Florida. I nodded, sipped my water, didn't interrupt. I'd learned how to be quiet without being small. No one asked me about my year. No one asked what I was working on. And still I stayed steady. Because this time, I wasn't waiting to be seen. I had already seen myself. I watched them pass dishes and swap polite jokes. I watched Jade hand out gifts in perfectly coordinated wrapping paper, each one with gold tags and fancy bows. It was clear they had a system, and I didn't fit into it. That was okay. I didn't need to, because in my garage at home, I had shelves full of work made with love. I had messages from people I'd never met telling me my pieces made them feel something again. And the truth was, I didn't feel out of place anymore. I just felt finished with trying. So I ate my meal, passed the gravy, and said thank you. And when Russell said what he said later that night, what this whole story began with, I didn't respond, because I already knew the answer. I wasn't a loser. I was just never their kind of winner. And that was perfectly fine with me. Dinner had all the usual pieces. The roast was perfect. The wine was flowing. The table looked like a magazine spread. Jade took the lead, as always, pouring drinks, passing dishes, leading the conversation like she was hosting a talk show. She toasted to family halfway through the meal, holding her glass high like it meant something. Everyone raised theirs. I raised mine too, even though no one looked in my direction when they clinked. I sat at the far end of the table, squeezed between a toddler and a big potted plant that blocked half my view. Someone had set a booster seat on the chair next to mine, but the child quickly lost interest in everything and slid to the floor to play with a tablet. So I just sat there, quiet, present, watching. Jade was in full bloom, talking about her company's charity event, mentioning friends I'd never heard of, sharing vacation plans for spring. She laughed often, especially at her own jokes. Russell chimed in here and there. Vincent nodded along like he'd heard it all before. No one asked me about anything. Not once. The only time my name came up was when Jade complimented the mugs I'd brought as gifts. "These are nice," she said, examining one. "Rustic." I smiled and said, "I made them." She blinked, then laughed lightly. "Oh, that's cute." And that was that. We moved on to dessert. Store-bought cheesecake, topped with frozen berries. They talked about a wine club they'd joined. Then it happened. Russell turned toward me mid-bite and said it out loud. "You're a loser. Dad's new wife isn't." Just like that. No hesitation. No warning. One of the younger cousins snorted, half laughing. Jade didn't say a word, but her lips curved into a smile. Vincent didn't even flinch. He just kept eating. I looked down at my plate. I didn't blink. I didn't frown. I didn't do a thing. But my hands went still. My tea had gone lukewarm. I sat there, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't owe them a reaction. My mind went somewhere else. I started thinking about the shelves in my garage, the orders waiting to ship, the woman from Maine who wrote me about her sister, the chef in Oregon who found comfort in my bowls. I thought about Denise and Arla cheering me on in that church basement, about the day I made my first Etsy sale, about the first time someone called my work beautiful and actually meant it. I thought about all the hours I'd spent quietly building something from scratch while they played happy family with matching sweaters. They didn't know what I had created. They didn't see what I had become. And that's what made the comment so strange. They still saw me as someone sitting alone with nothing. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Not even close. I didn't raise my voice. I raised something else. I raised myself. I picked up my fork and took another bite of green beans. Calm, steady, like nothing had been said at all. The room buzzed again with other talk, as if what he'd said wasn't cruel, as if it didn't matter. But I noticed how Lila, the middle granddaughter, kept glancing at me. I noticed how the teenage cousin across the table looked uncomfortable. He didn't say anything, but he shifted in his chair. Not everyone laughed. And I saw that. Russell was still talking, like it was nothing, like that sentence didn't carry weight. But it did. Not because it hurt. Not anymore. But because it proved something. They still didn't see me. And that was fine. Because I didn't come there to be seen. I came to see for myself. To confirm what I already knew. That no matter what happened at that table, I had already won. Not in their way. Not with titles or toasts or shiny pictures on the internet. But in a deeper way. I had something of my own. I had peace. And that peace didn't need defending. So I cleared my plate when I was done, thanked Jade for dinner, and helped carry dishes to the kitchen. No one mentioned what Russell said. No one apologized. But I didn't expect them to. People who believe they've done nothing wrong rarely say sorry. I placed my plate in the sink and turned off the faucet with care. There was power in not reacting, not because I was weak, but because I didn't need the approval of people who had forgotten my worth the moment it was no longer convenient. Let them keep their toasts. I had built a life that needed no applause. It was late by the time the house quieted down. The younger kids were tucked into bed. The cousins were in the den watching some movie with the volume too loud. I stayed in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed, my shoes lined up neatly beneath it, suitcase closed in the corner. I was ready to go. I had already planned to leave early the next morning. No long goodbyes, no drawn-out breakfast. Just slip out before the house woke up, drive home in peace, and put it all behind me. But around 10 o'clock, there was a soft knock on the door. I opened it. Russell stood there, holding a glass of water, not quite meeting my eyes. He cleared his throat. Hey, just wanted to say, he didn't mean it. I didn't respond right away. He went on. The thing I said at dinner, it was a dumb joke. Just trying to get a laugh. I wasn't serious. I nodded once. Okay. He shifted from one foot to the other. Jade said, I should come say something. That maybe you took it the wrong way. That made me smile. Not because it was funny, because it was exactly what I expected. A suggestion from someone else. A half step. Not ownership, just obligation. I didn't take it the wrong way. I said, I took it exactly as it was given. He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. Instead, I walked to the small dresser and pulled out a wrapped box I had placed there earlier that evening. Brown paper, twine bough, a small tag with his name written in my handwriting. I handed it to him. Here. He frowned. What is it? Open it when you get a minute. He hesitated, then started to unwrap it right there. Inside was one of my handmade mugs. It had a cream and sand glaze, soft around the edges. But this one was special. On the front, I'd etched words before firing it. People forget. Clay remembers. He turned it over slowly. You made this. I nodded. He looked back into the box and found the second item I'd placed underneath, a folded sheet of paper. 4 pages, stapled. My year-end business summary. He pulled it out, unfolded it, and started reading. I waited. His eyes moved over the numbers, the sales, the list of customer locations, the feature in Modern Makers monthly, the second feature in Craft and Form, where they had called my glaze technique subtle, timeless, and deeply personal. He looked up, stunned. This is your business? Yes. This says you did $78,000 in sales. Last year, yes, around 6,000 individual orders. His mouth parted slightly. You made all this by yourself? In my garage, I said, I taught myself, watched tutorials, took notes, set up the store, packed every box, wrote every thank you note. He glanced at the mug again. And you're in magazines? I nodded. More might be coming next year. I've been contacted by 2 more editors and a podcast. He looked completely lost for a second. Then he blinked and asked quietly, why didn't you tell us? I looked him right in the eye. Because you weren't listening. He opened his mouth like he was going to argue, then stopped. I spent years showing up, I said, sending gifts, making calls, asking to be included. I was trying to stay connected, trying to keep a thread alive. And every time I was met with silence. Or worse, polite rejection dressed up as busy schedules. He stared at the papers in his hand, still silent. I finally stopped trying. I continued, and I started putting that time into something that gave back. Not just financially, but emotionally. I found people who wanted what I had to offer, not because they knew me, but because they saw value in what I made. Russell sat down on the edge of the chair, near the desk, mug still in one hand. You really built this whole thing? He asked. I did. Quietly, carefully, without asking for help. He looked up at me again. Mom, this is amazing. I nodded, but I wasn't looking for praise. I'm not showing you this to impress you, I said. I'm showing you because I need you to understand something. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not looking for a seat at your table anymore. I said, calmly, I built my own. People show up for me there. You just don't see them. He looked down. I'm not angry, I added. Truly, I'm not bitter either. I'm just clear now. I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be chosen. I want to be respected. And I've built a space where that happens. He nodded slowly. I didn't know. You didn't want to know? I replied. There's a difference. The room went quiet. I picked up the box lid and gently placed it back over the mug. Take that with you. You don't have to use it, but maybe one day you'll understand what it means. He stood. Can I tell the others? You can tell whoever you want. I said, I'm not hiding, but I'm not performing either. He gave a small, tired smile. Okay. He turned to go, then paused. I really am sorry, for what I said, for a lot of things. I nodded once. I know. Then I closed the door. Not angrily, not with drama, just gently. Like I was closing a chapter one didn't need to reread again. I walked back to the bed, picked up the book I'd brought, and turned off the overhead light. I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel hollow. I felt done. Not defeated. Not sad. Just done trying to fit where I no longer belonged. Let them have their laughter. Let them keep their clever jokes. I had stories of my own, and every one of them was still being shaped quietly, in clay, in rooms they'd never stepped into. They called me a loser, but what they never realized was that I was never playing the same game. The next morning, I left before the sun came up. No one was awake. No one saw me off. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. The drive back home was quiet. The roads were clear, the sky soft gray. I didn't turn on the radio. I just let my thoughts settle, like dust after a long day. When I pulled into my driveway, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, relief. Not sadness, not regret, just the peace that comes when you've said what needed to be said and didn't lower yourself to be heard. Inside, everything was just as I left it. My favorite mug on the counter, the blanket folded on the couch, the faint smell of vanilla from the candle I'd blown out before I left. I walked into the garage, flipped on the light, and smiled. There they were, my shelves, full and ready. A line of packages I hadn't had time to ship before I left. Orders from California, North Carolina, Indiana. I logged into my dashboard. 24 new orders since I'd been gone. 5 messages from customers asking when I'd restock the honey brown glaze. 2 kind notes, one saying their sister cried when she opened her birthday gift. I printed the labels and stacked the boxes by the door. Then I walked back inside and boiled water for tea. Clara came by that afternoon with a tin of oatmeal cookies and 2 slices of apple pie. She handed me a cup of coffee and said, "So, how was it?" I gave her a look. She laughed. "That good, huh?" We sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight coming through the window, just enough to warm the backs of our hands. I told her what happened, more or less. Left out the sting, kept the truth. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer advice. Just listened. When I was done, she said, "Well, sounds like you're free now." And that's exactly what it felt like. We spent the rest of the afternoon sketching out a plan for a spring open house. Just a small one. Nothing big. I'd clean up the garage, set out some of my newer work, maybe have a few extra mugs on hand. Clara would bring her quilts. Arla offered to make little signs. Denise had a folding table and a coffee urn. It wasn't about sales. It was about sharing. People ask me all the time now how I started over. I tell them I didn't. I just started. Sometimes you don't need a fresh start. You just need to begin again, where you are, with what you have. Later that evening, I sat on the couch with my tea and glanced at my phone. A message from my granddaughter. It read, "Granny, can you teach me how to make that mug next summer?" 7 words, but they said more than anything I heard all Christmas. I smiled. I wrote back, "Yes, I'd love that." Then I set the phone down and looked around the room. I used to think home was the place where your family gathered, the place where you felt seen. Now I know better. Home is where you create. And this little house, quiet, soft, honest, is the most full my life has ever been. The walls in my studio are covered in handwritten notes, taped crooked, curling at the corners. Some typed, some scribbled, some in crayon. All of them real. They're reminders, not of who I was, but who I've become. Being forgotten gave me time, and that time gave me this life. Not everyone gets to say that, but I can. And if you're listening right now, maybe you needed to hear it too. If you've ever been talked over, dismissed, or replaced, hit that like button. And if you've ever been made to feel small in a room you helped build, share this video with someone who needs to know they're not alone. And if you're still thinking about subscribing, ask yourself this. When someone calls you a loser, do you try to prove them wrong? Or do you go build something they'll never understand? Either way, I'll be here, still shaping clay, still writing, still whole. And if no one said it lately, let me be the first. You matter. I see you. And maybe it's time you saw yourself too. The comments are open. I'll be reading.